This is our fucking city.
He just shook up the world.
I don't even know where you're sitting at.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's your host, Raul Infante, here with Taking This Sports. Don't forget, guys, we're not only the guys that watch these sports, but we analyze them. Here covering tonight, UFC ESPN 3, headlining Francis Ngannou against Junior Dos Santos. Man, did this fight cover what we expected. Listen, I'm going to be honest. I'm going to be the first guy to tell you I actually had Junior Dos Santos winning this fight with a TKO in the third round. And let me explain why. Francis Ngannou has been in this sport for not that many years. He's a guy that has an incredible story. He was living in the streets of London. He got taken in the gym, and he was actually going to pursue a boxing career, ends up in the UFC. So, as a guy with Junior Dos Santos that has so many years experience, I thought that he was going to be able to look at the fight against Stipe Miocic and use that as his background. So what I thought was going to happen was that Junior Dos Santos was going to come out with a lot of leg kicks, just like he does, those strong leg kicks to the midsection of Francis Ngannou. Reason being is because Francis Ngannou is one of those guys that gasses out right away. Yes, is he powerful, but you can negate that by going to the body. So I thought that Junior Dos Santos was going to go to the body early and be able to take his time in this fight. But that did not end up happening. I was actually surprised that Ngannou was the guy that came out throwing leg kicks. I thought that Dos Santos was actually taken in surprise that Ngannou came out with those leg kicks because Dos Santos did not look comfortable in that fight. What did Dos Santos do? I've seen it so many times in his fights where he comes out and throws that overhand right. What happens when you miss that overhand right? Whoa, I'm out of frame, right? What ends up happening, you have a lot of body exposed. Francis Ngannou moves out of the way. He throws that hook. Boom, connects once. Boom, throws a hook again, and that's all she rolls. Ground and pound, he ends up winning that fight. So at the end of the day, what ends up happening is that you have Francis Ngannou being the #1 contender for the title, and it's in his rights because after that fight against Stipe Miocic, I'm like, man, this man got exposed, especially against Derrick Lewis, which I had Ngannou winning that fight. I put a lot of money on that fight, and I lost a lot of money on that fight. So at the end of the day, I am proud that Ngannou was able to bounce back, and he deserves it. Whether Cormier defends it against Stipe Miocic and wins, and then fights Ngannou, or Daniel Cormier retires, beating Stipe Miocic and doesn't fight Ngannou. But at the end of the day, I think it's going to be Stipe Miocic against Ngannou for the second fight going around. Stipe was very hurt in that first fight, and I think that Ngannou, if he lands the correct way, he could be the next heavyweight champion of the world. So, listen, best of luck to Ngannou, but we have a lot of fights to cover, so we're going to move on to the co-main event of the evening, which was just as juicy, which is Joseph Benavidez against Jussier Formiga. Listen, these guys have been in title contention for years. Benavidez has come out in the short end of the stick a lot of times. Jussier Formiga has been the guy that should be fighting for the title for many, many years. And listen, there's one guy that's holding 2 titles right now. That's an Olympic champion, gold Olympic champion. And that's Henry Cejudo, a man that Joseph Benavidez actually fought and had a split decision against. And Benavidez showed up in this fight and ended up winning this fight. So let me actually break this down first, because this fight was difficult to break down. So Formiga actually came out and lands a right hand right in the beginning of the fight. And Benavidez ends up getting cut over the left eyebrow. You can see Benavidez was actually a little uncomfortable with the cut, right? He's moving the blood out of the way. Formiga ends up getting a takedown, and I'm like, man, this does not look good against Benavidez, but you cannot count that man out. Reason being is because he's a veteran of the sport. He's fought everybody. For Christ's sake, he fought DJ twice. The first fight was very close. Yeah, he got knocked out the second fight, but it doesn't matter. He's been there with the best. That's the point. So a guy like Formiga, you never know what's going to happen. But point is, Formiga stood his ground. He won that first round. So moving on to the second round, I thought Benavidez did the smart thing. He was pushing forward. But like I said, Formiga wants this fight just as bad as Benavidez. He's standing his ground there. Benavidez actually secures the takedown, but Jussier Formiga has that BJJ background. They're going back and forth, back and forth. It's exciting. But Benavidez is actually closing the distance, and he's using that wrestler's ankle pick. Let me explain to you for a second. That means that he's pushing forward, he's sticking that left hand forward and actually sticking that right hand to the ankle to see if he can secure the takedown. If he can't secure it, what was he doing? As soon as he was doing that ankle pick, he was throwing that overhand straight right to see if he could land down Jussier Formiga. Formiga's a smart guy. He wasn't allowing him to do that. So what does Benavidez do? He keeps pushing the pace. Benavidez eventually ends up closing the distance enough where he lands a right hook. Think about it. A right hook that lands properly. Bang. Your hips are going to your left side. And what does he do? He throws the high leg kick. But remember, there's torque to his left side. And then there's torque to his right side with the left kick. So it lands perfectly right on Formiga's face. What ends up happening? Jussier Formiga, he tries to play it off. Doesn't end up working. He's wobbling. And Joseph Benavidez smells blood. He goes bang, 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 bang. Listen, against the cage, that's very hard to defend, especially at that weight class. Jussier Formiga couldn't do anything. He ends up folding, and Benavidez ends up winning this fight with the ground and pound. There was nothing that the referee could have done except call that fight. So the next fight that should happen is Benavidez against Henry Cejudo to see ultimately who's the better fighter there. So we're actually going to move on to the next fight. But before that we do that, we're actually going to take a short break. Hey guys, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and don't forget to hit that bell button for more notifications. So with that, we're actually going to continue with UFC ESPN 3 with the fight that's moving on, Rocco versus Demian Maia. Listen, Demian Maia is one of those guys where I thought he should have retired by now. In my opinion, I think he's the greatest BJJ guy, and most respect to him for being in the sport for that much time. But Rocco Martin is one of those up-and-coming guys. I thought he was going to be able to pull this fight off. But listen, in the first round, I was a little bit surprised. We're going to cover this fight. Demian Maia is one of those guys that is known for being one of those guys that is constantly on his back. He does not mind being in the ground game at all, even when he's pulling guard. So I thought it was a little bit surprising when he was actually the guy pushing the pace in the first round. You can see Rocco Martin. He's like, man, I got to be a little careful because Demian Maia is going to be that guy that's going to try to secure the takedown. But Demian Maia was pushing forward. Rocco Martin was not. And Rocco Martin looked huge in this fight. You can see both fighters' backs, and Rocco Martin looked a lot bigger. But it does not matter to Demian Maia. Demian Maia is actually able to secure a single leg on Rocco Martin, and there's something that he used in this fight that a lot of real MMA fans have been noticing over the years, and it's the Nurmagomedov takedown. Listen, once you take a fighter down, he's using a 45-degree angle with the right leg, and then actually has the left leg completely straight to lock that in. And Rocco Martin was not able to get out of there for a long, long time. Demian Maia went to the ground and pound, and by the time that Rocco Martin got up, it was the end of the round. Demian Maia is up 1-0. Second round, it's the same thing. But Rocco Martin's like, all right, wait a minute. I have to take control of this fight. I'm the bigger guy. You know, I'm trying to make a name of myself. So what does he do? He starts pushing the pace. He actually takes the center of the octagon. You can see Demian Maia is actually circling around, trying to figure out how to figure out Rocco Martin. What's he trying to do? But Demian Maia adjusts. And what does he do? Again, it's a mirror image. He's able to secure another takedown on him. Pretty much the exact same thing. Right on the cage, ground and pound. Another uneventful round, in my opinion, for Rocco Martin. For Demian Maia, this is a victory because most of his fights are boring fights, right? But he gets the job done. He gets the victories. So, in my opinion, it's 2-0 going into the third round. So, this is not rocket science, guys. If Rocco Martin is down 0-2 in the fight, he has to go for it all. He has to get that victory. He has to get the knockout to win this fight. So, in the third round, I'm thinking that he's going to come out and start swinging. I've seen him do it before in other fights, so I thought that he was going to be able to do that in this fight, or at least attempt to do that to try to knock out Demian Maia, a very, very old fighter in the sport. So you would think that Demian Maia would be slowing down at this point. So Rocco Martin, I was really, really surprised that he was not pushing the pace. Listen, there was one thing that Rocco Martin was doing in the third round that I knew that had him discouraged with all the takedowns that Demian Maia was able to secure. And it's, listen, when you throw a right hand, what you're supposed to do is plant your back leg. Remember, he's an orthodox fighter. So what you're doing is planting your back right leg and throwing the straight right while pushing with your back right. What was he doing? He was lifting his back leg up. So there's no power behind those shots. Again, he's down 2-0. So how do you expect him to be able to win this fight with a knockout if he's not able to plant the foot behind him? So Demian Maia ends up winning this fight. And you know what? I'm extremely impressed the fact that he's able to beat a guy like Rocco. But you know what? That shows that Rocco has a lot to learn. Yeah, will he be maybe a big name in the sport in the future? Who knows? But Demian Maia ends up with the victory in this fight. So moving on, we're actually going to move on to Roberts versus Pichel. From hell, Pichel. Listen, to me, in my opinion, this was actually the upset of the night. Reason being is because Roberts came in this fight 8-0, and Pichel, listen, these are one of the guys that you would think that Roberts would be able to dominate. So Roberts comes out actually in the first round, and he's moving around. He's clearly using the distance to his advantage, the length to his advantage. And the one thing that I like that he was doing is that he was using the jab, but it wasn't for an offensive perspective. It was to measure the distance with Pichel, because you can see Pichel, he's moving his head. He's trying to figure out how he's going to get on the inside of Roberts, but Roberts is circling and using the jab to figure out the distance. But what does Roberts do? He ends up being really smart. He ends up securing a takedown with 46 seconds of that round and actually landed Pichel on his head. I was like, oh man, is this Rose Namajunas again? No, it ended up not being that. This guy is tough as nails. He ends up getting back and ends up finishing the first round. But you got Roberts 1-0 after the first round. So the second round, actually, there was one thing that Roberts did that I did not like in this fight. And it was when Pichel threw an overhand right, there's one thing that you should never do and actually pull back on a punch. Why? Because you could fall off balance, right? So what does Roberts do? He actually pulls back on the fight the punch that Pichel throws and ends up off balance. So Pichel's level changes and ends up with a takedown. It's common sense, guys. If you throw an overhand right, you follow through with the takedown, because if the guy's off balance, you have a higher chance of getting it. But you know what? Pichel ends up getting a little bit of ground and pound in the first half of the round. But Roberts is a great fighter. There's a reason why this man is the favorite in this fight. So Roberts ends up getting up and securing actually his own takedown in this fight. But you know what? Pichel is in this fight, and I think he was actually able to secure the round. So I think it goes 1-1. Third round comes around, and Pichel again lands another takedown, which is massive, especially in a very, very close fight. There's one thing that Pichel was doing that I did not like in this fight, and it's the fact that he was able to actually trap one of Roberts' arms. And once you have an arm trap, you could go ground and pound all day. But what did Pichel do? He actually was trying to go for the guillotine. While he was trying to go for the guillotine, he forgets about the arm being trapped. He forgets about the ground and pound. So Roberts is smart. He's one of those guys where you know that he has a solid ground game. He gets himself to the fence. He gets up. And a lot of people thought, oh, maybe, you know, Roberts is done in this situation. No, he's not done in this situation. Look at the hand placement. He's actually fighting the hands of Pichel. So I knew at that point that Roberts was in an okay situation. But what ends up happening, Roberts ends up breaking from that. Okay, cool. Roberts, you broke out of that guillotine. You survived the ground and pound. But then what ends up happening? The moment of the fight, Pichel actually uses the John Jones spinning elbow. Lands perfectly on Roberts. Roberts is wobbly. Oh, snap. What ends up happening? Roberts goes down again. Pichel gets ground and pound. Full mount. And listen, in the second round, he got full mount, but it was only with 3 seconds. So he was not able to work on that ground and pound. Third round, he was able to work a little bit and secure the victory for himself. Even though Roberts was able to get himself up in the third round, it wasn't enough. Pichel ends up with the upset of the night, and man, was I proud, because honestly, I thought Roberts was going to be able to actually win that fight. So moving on, we're going to move on to Dober versus Reyes. Listen, Dober is one of those fighters that I've been watching for years, and I honestly thought that he was going to be one of those guys that was going to be able to take over the sport. You see his physique. You see his looks right away. You're like, man, this is one of those guys that he's going to be a champion one day. You just don't know. 9 losses later, you're like, oh, man, what happened to this guy? Listen, Dober, it's not simple, but if you look at the tail of the tape, he's one of those guys that starts off really fast, is really strong, but with those muscles, I always say lactic acid is extremely important. So Reyes, what do you have to do with a guy that starts fast and is very powerful? You stay out of range, you use your ground game, you do whatever it takes to not allow Dober to exchange with you and use that power and use his advantage. But what does Reyes do? He gets in a couple of exchanges with Dober. Dober catches him with a left hook. Dober catches him with a left hook. And Dober caught him with 2 straight rights and ends up hurting him. Listen, I'm not going to discredit Reyes there because when Reyes seriously got hurt, I thought the fight was over because Reyes actually dropped and Dober started with the ground and pound. But Reyes was able to recover, actually protected his head really well, got up again, but it wasn't enough. It doesn't matter if you're able to get back on your feet. That does not mean that you're recovering. So Dober again went to the left hook, got Reyes on the cage, and it was all she wrote at that point. Reyes did a phenomenal job of trying to recover or trying to defend, but Dober was the better man at this night. So with that, Dober was a better fight tonight. So with that, we're actually going to finish that. Don't forget, guys, we're not only the guys that watch these sports, but we analyze them. Here with your boy, Raul Infante, with Taking This Sports, covering UFC ESPN 3.